public life. India has the second largest number of internet users in the world today, many of whom are first-generation users and lack the technical know-how of cybersecurity. A robust cyber security infrastructure is more imperative than ever in this digital age, wherein everything from critical infrastructure systems such as water and energy that need to be operational 24/7 to military security are at risk of threat and penetrating attack from foreign forces. We live in an era of hybrid warfare, wherein hybrid methods of warfare such as propaganda, deception, sabotage, disinformation, and deployment of proxies to fight military wars are being utilized to destabilize adversaries. This is exacerbated with the advent of social media, which is the prime mode of communication with the outside world, and one which is even used by terrorist groups for recruitment and spreading of propaganda and radicalization. Thus, the challenges to national security are varied and immense. Cybersecurity is a critical element of national security, and counter-terrorism battles cannot be fought in silos. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I am Purva Vaise Patil, and on behalf of the Yashwantrao Chavan Center, I would like to welcome you all to the 6th lecture of Mumbai Dialogue on World Affairs. The Mumbai Dialogue on World Affairs is the Yashwantrao Chavan Center's newest effort to create a space for dialogue and discussion on public policy, foreign affairs, and political economy, with the aim of having foreign policy directives emerge from strong centers of influence, such as Mumbai, the financial capital of India. This has been possible because of the efforts of Honorable Member of Parliament, Mrs. Supriya Sure, the architect of this event, and the working president of both the Chavan Center and the Nehru Center. This is the 6th lecture in our monthly series of the Mumbai Dialogue, and we are honored to have with us Dr. Samir Patil, Senior Fellow at ORF Mumbai, who will be enlightening us on India's cybersecurity challenges, and Dr. Sachin Parde from Mumbai University, who will be presiding over today's program. I would like to request both our speakers to kindly join us on stage. Dr. Samir Patil is a Senior Fellow at ORF Mumbai. His work focuses on the intersection of technology and national security, including cybersecurity. He also researches India's national security priorities, counter-terrorism, and regional security. He served as an assistant director at the National Security Council Secretariat in the Prime Minister's office, New Delhi, where he handled counter-terrorism and security risks. Dr. Patil is the author of Securing India in the Cyber Era and has co-edited Moving Forward, EU-India Relations, the Significance of the Security Dialogues. He has a PhD and MPhil in International Politics from Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi. After the 2008 Mumbai attacks, Dr. Patil participated in several Track 1 and Track 1.5 dialogues, including India-US and India-UK Strategic Intelligence Dialogues and India-UK Track 1.5 Cyber Dialogue. In 2019, he received the prestigious Cranberra Fellowship awarded by the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, Australia. His work and views have been cited by the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Guardian, Financial Times, the Wall Street Journal, Al Jazeera, CNBC, Associated Press, and other news agencies. Welcome, Dr. Patil, and thank you for being here with us. Dr. Sachin Parde is an assistant professor and coordinator of postgraduate diploma in international studies at the Department of Civics and Politics, University of Mumbai. His area of interests are security studies, regionalism and international relations, and border studies, with special reference to South Asia, as well as theories of international relations. Dr. Parde was selected to participate in the study of the U.S. Institutes for Scholars on U.S. National Security Policy Making program in 2012, supported by the State Department of the United States of America. He has presented papers in more than 30 national and international seminars and conferences. Thank you, Dr. Parde, for being here with us, and we're looking forward to your presidential address. So without any further ado, I would like to welcome Dr. Samir Patil.
Thank you, Purva. Thank you, Purva, for inviting me for this really prestigious Mumbai Dialogue on World Affairs. Thank you, Supriya, who is not here. And thank you, Yashwantrao Chavan Center, for inviting me today to talk about India's cybersecurity challenges. And thank you for all the audience who I have heard repeatedly, that they are really interested in hearing more about this particular topic. So what I'm going to do today is basically look at first the geopolitical context in which this entire cybersecurity challenges are evolving. Then I'm going to look at India's cyber threat landscape. Then look at what kind of policy responses and challenges India has undertaken in response to the cyber threat, and finally end with India's cyber diplomacy. But before I begin, let me just first talk about these two cyber attacks which you may have heard about, which happened in recent years. The one which happened in last December, November, basically was a ransomware attack on the All India Institute of Medical Sciences, right? This particular attack was suspected to be carried out by the Chinese hackers, and it was a ransomware attack. Ransomware basically means that hackers get into your system and they lock the entire system. And in return to regain their access to that kind of data, you have to pay a ransom. Okay, most of the times this ransom is in cryptocurrency such as Bitcoin and those kind of things. So imagine, for instance, in a physical setting, you are out of your house, and then you want, and when you're out, someone basically locks your house, takes the keys, and when you demand access to your house, that person basically is taking ransom for you to regain the entry. That is the thing which happens with the ransomware attack. But interesting in this particular case was that even though it is termed as a ransomware attack, in a sense they locked the entire systems, there was no ransom demand which was made. And that's very peculiar with this cyber attack. So what was the exact intention of the hackers to gain access to that kind of data? We'll come to that later. The second attack that I want to talk about is an attack which we in Mumbai actually faced in October 2020, when there was an extended blackout for more than 8 to 12 hours, right? That was basically because of the malware which was inserted by the Chinese hackers into India's power grid. Interesting, because the attack was actually notified by one of the US cybersecurity companies called as Recorded Future, and the company actually noted that this attack has been persistent. So in October 2020, there was a breach of the Indian power sector here in Mumbai, and then again last year, they said that a similar kind of an attack has happened in the power grids in Ladakh, where basically our military is fighting with the Chinese military on the line of actual control. Besides the power sector, Recorded Future also said that some parts of Indian port sector, so for instance JNPT, as well as some parts of railway infrastructure, were also compromised in this particular kind of attacks. So these two attacks, this AIMS ransomware attack and the attack on the Indian power sector, are basically a reflection of the global trend where hackers which are supported by the state actors, okay, adversarial states such as China, Russia and all that, they are targeting your computer networks and therefore trying to coerce you into doing something. And that is basically the geopolitics of the cyberspace. But before I talk about the geopolitical context, I want to talk briefly about the role of technology in international politics. Today, if you follow international politics, if you look at the latest international developments, you would see that technology has, in a sense, become a driver of international relations, right? That basically means that it is, in a sense, defining your politics, it is defining security, and defining economics. And there are two proposals of two developments which, in a sense, demonstrate the role of technology. One is this idea of a D10, or Democracy's 10, which was floated by the former UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson, who said that democracies need to come together to create an alternative supply chain of 5G and other kinds of technologies so that they can reduce their over-reliance and over-dependence on China. So that was the concept of D10, and eventually he did convene a summit of the democracies in UK in 2021. And there is another concept called as techno-democracies. Techno-democracies is basically countries with top technology sectors, advanced economies, and a commitment to liberal democracy. So similar to D10. So in this particular category, you can include US, UK, France, Germany, India, Israel, also Japan, South Korea, Australia. So these are the kind of countries need to come together, and they should basically focus on the technology collaboration. So that is how technology, in a sense, has become the main driver of international relations. There are many students of international politics here today. So if you recall, there is a Treaty of Westphalia, which basically defines the international system. And in a sense, technology is also, in a sense, challenging this Westphalian international system because it is challenging national sovereignty, and it is also, in a sense, creating new challenges for the nation states. So that is one role of technology. But if you look at the cyberspace is also creating new challenges for the international politics as such. Many of you would have heard about the North-South divide, the divide between the developing states and the developed world. Well, now a similar kind of a division is also being recreated in the cyberspace. So if you look at, for instance, the internet access, that is the basic in a sense, criteria for gauging a country's digital development. Internet access in the developed countries, it's almost 87%, right? So all the countries in North America, as well as Europe, as well as Australia, and some countries in East Asia, there are 87% of the population is connected to the internet. But if you look at the least developed countries, countries in Southeast Asia, as well as in Africa, and some parts of South America, it is just 19%. Right? So there's a huge divide in terms of who can come on the internet highway, who can benefit from this internet. And that is the digital divide, which basically defines the ability of the countries to respond to the technological challenges, the ability of the countries to respond to the emerging cyber threats. So now the North-South divide that you used to hear in the economic sphere is now being recast as a digital divide, which means if you 19% of the people in the LDCs are not getting access, which basically means almost 3 billion people still today don't have access to the internet. Right? 3 billion out of like 8.5 billion global population. And this is an important factor when we look at the geopolitics of cybersecurity. Today, countries are basically exploiting vulnerabilities and weaknesses in every country's computer networks to hack into their computer networks, steal important data. In the case of the companies and corporations, they're stealing their business plans and also disrupt the critical infrastructure operations. What is critical infrastructure? As Purva was talking about in the introduction, what is critical infrastructure? Critical infrastructure is basically that infrastructure which needs to be operational 24/7, 365 days of the year. So imagine, for instance, power systems. Imagine, for instance, your water systems. Imagine, for instance, your traffic systems, your railway signaling systems, your air traffic control, nuclear plants, your banking system. These are the kind of systems which need to be operational and functional all the time. They cannot be disrupted. And if they're disrupted, and if they're disrupted for a longer period, then the society and the economy and the country faces many problems. And today, many adversarial states are exactly targeting the critical infrastructure of other countries. So they're targeting nuclear reactors, they're targeting oil pipelines, they're targeting power grids. And in many cases, what is happening is that there is a domino effect which happens. So for instance, if you look at the critical infrastructure, I would say power system is the most, I would say, the element, the basic of the critical infrastructure, because when there is an extended power blackout, that means, for instance, the metro systems will get disrupted. Okay, so your water systems also get disrupted because they don't have the access to power. So that is the kind of domino effect. In fact, in Delhi in 2012, when there was a similar kind of a power blackout, which actually went on for 2.5 days, the Delhi Metro's power backup, which was supposed to last for 48 hours, okay, they used it for 48 hours and then they could not come back online because there was no power. So then the Delhi Metro could not run. So that is the kind of domino effect which we talk about, and this is the kind of impact that the hackers are trying to achieve. And therefore it is no wonder that all the major powers today have dedicated units which basically are only carrying out cyber attacks. But even as we look at the cyberspace and we look at the increasing number of cyber attacks, the last 3 years of the COVID-19 pandemic have really, in a sense, been an important development in the geopolitics of cyberspace, because even as the global attention was focused on tackling the pandemic, we had hospitals full of patients, we had, medicine shortages, we had oxygen cylinder shortages. When the world was grappling with those kind of challenges, there were some state actors as well as state-supported non-state actors, which were solely, carrying out cyber attacks, targeting hospitals, other kinds of health infrastructure, vaccine companies, and those kind of things. So even in these times of adversities, these hackers and other kinds of rogue actors, they found an opportunity to execute the cyber attacks. And in that sense, what happened during the last COVID-19 pandemic was that attacks targeting the healthcare and the hospitals really shot through the roof. And in doing so, the problem that is basic in the cyberspace, that problem comes to fore, which is the problem of attribution, which basically means, that unlike the physical attacks or the kinetic attacks, you can, after due investigation, do find out who was the perpetrator, who carried out the attack, who committed the crime. That is not really the case in the cyberspace. There is always a difficulty in identifying or clearly identifying who carried out the attack. And that, in a sense, is an advantageous position for the person or for the actor who carries out the attacks. So many states are actually taking advantage of the problem of attribution in executing the cyber attacks. Of course, over the last few years, there has been technical developments where countries are finding out how they are, or who has carried out the cyber attacks. But again, that is the capacity which many developed countries have. That is the capacity which is not there with many of the developing countries in Africa, Latin America, and some parts of Asia. But it is true that states are the ones which are the major executor of the cyber attacks. But there is one particular group which is also emerging as a non-state actor in the cyberspace, a very influential non-state actor in the cyberspace, and that is the Lazarus group. Lazarus group is basically a gang of criminals, okay, but they receive support from the North Korean regime. And since 2009, you can see, they have targeted so many countries for a variety of reasons. One major reason for their targeting is basically stealing the money. They basically target banks, financial institutions, and cryptocurrency exchanges with the sole purpose of carrying out theft. And it's interesting because that is supported with North Korea. As you would know, the students of international politics would know, North Korea has been at the end of receiving sanctions for the last many years. And that has reduced or curtailed the ability of the North Korean regime to generate revenues. And by supporting this hacker group, Lazarus group, they are actually trying to generate revenue for their own operations. This Lazarus group targets the banks, steals money from the bank, and then gives it to the North Korean state. And that is how North Korean state is able to survive itself, and the regime survives on that kind of money. There's also now evidence which is saying that the money which has been used from these cyber crimes is also being funneled by North Korea into its missile and other kinds of nuclear weapons program. So that is how the non-state actors are now blurring the gap between the state actors. So even though the non-state actor like Lazarus group is carrying an attack, the main perpetrator is the North Korean state, right? So you cannot really say, that this is a non-state actor and this is a state actor. This is now blurring the distinction between the state actor and the non-state actor. And if you look at the history of the cyber attacks, this is how it has panned out. 2009 onwards, the major attack which was reported in the media was the Stuxnet virus. Designed by the United States and Israel, this particular malware targeted the Iranian nuclear program. Interesting because even though the target was the Iranian nuclear program, the virus, before reaching the target, traveled through 120 countries, including India, and then finally hit the target in 2010. The result was the Iranian nuclear reactors were slowed down, and that gave a setback to Iran's nuclear program, and that is how Iran's nuclear program was derailed. That was the sole intention of this Stuxnet virus. 2014, there was a data breach in the Sony Corporation's computer networks. It was carried out by the Lazarus group. Reason? Sony was actually producing a movie which was a satire movie on the North Korean dictator Kim Jong-un. So Sony Corporation faced a cyber attack from a North Korean-backed Lazarus group. The group hacked into the systems of the Sony, stole Sony's all future business plans, and one movie which was not yet released. And therefore Sony had to shelve, that particular movie's release. And plus Sony also faced lawsuits from its employees for the breach of personal data. So even though someone else carried out the attack, Sony as a company had to bore the brunt of that particular cyber attack. Lazarus Group, as I talked about, was also targeting the banks. So in 2016, they targeted the Bangladesh Bank's account. Bangladesh Bank is the central bank of Bangladesh, just like our Reserve Bank of India. The Bangladesh Bank's account in the Federal Reserve of New York Bank, it was targeted by the Lazarus Group. They were trying to execute theft of almost $1 billion. They were successful in taking $100 million, and the rest of the $900 million could not be successful. Bangladesh Bank lost $100 million. They traced the money, but they were not able to recover the money. The money was actually traced back to a casino in Philippines, which was being used by the North Korean regime. So that is how the Lazarus group was working on behalf of North Korea. And the latest attack, which happened was in 2021, was a ransomware attack on the Colonial Pipeline. Now, Colonial Pipeline is like an oil pipeline which operates on United States West Coast and provides like 45 to 50% of the country's of the West Coast gas as well as oil. So when there was an attack or ransomware attack, the system was locked out. So Colonial Pipeline could not deliver oil to some of its customers, and that increased the fuel prices. Right? In some parts of the United States, the fuel prices almost doubled down. Right? So that is what happened in the case of the ransomware attack on the Colonial Pipeline, and that was a domino effect. So company faced a cyber attack, its systems got locked, and therefore it could not deliver oil to its customers, and that shot the fuel prices in some parts of the United States. And as I said, ransomware is really now becoming a major threat, because criminals have realized that once companies' servers are locked, they become desperate, right? They want to resume operations as early as possible because they're also facing losses on other fronts, and plus also the wrath of the consumers. So they're willing to pay the ransom. Okay, so in many cases, the ransom is paid, the company does not talk about it, and the criminal gangs then resume their activities. And that is what is happening in most of the ransomware attacks. And that has, in a sense, given a birth to a ransomware industry, ransomware as a service. So now there are criminal gangs, and now there are middlemen of the criminal gangs who actually provide the ransomware, the virus, to other companies, who then target the other companies and then get the money. So interesting is, as these cyber attacks are increasing, there are many countries which have thought about, for instance, what to do, how to respond to the cyber attacks. Most of the times what we have seen is actually a retaliation for the cyber attacks within the cyberspace. So for instance, after the Stuxnet virus hit the Iranian nuclear program, Iranian hackers there was not yet clarity on who had carried out the attack. So Iran suspected the role of Saudi Arabia. Okay, so then Iranian hackers targeted a Saudi company, Saudi Aramco, which is the oil company, and they wiped out the data from 75% of the company's computer networks, right? So that was the kind of retaliation that we have seen in the cyberspace, a tit for tat kind of a cyber attack. But now there are countries which are actually thinking, beyond the cyberspace, because the intensity of the cyber attacks and the disruption caused by cyber attacks is also increasing. Israeli military is one such example. So in May 2019, Israeli Defense Forces actually targeted the Hamas technology division, which was basically carrying out cyber attacks against the Israeli critical infrastructure. So they preempted a cyber attack by bombing this building of the Hamas technology division, and therefore that was a new kind of retaliation, a retaliation in the physical sphere that we had seen for the cyber attacks. But there are also other non-military, non-cyber attacks which have responses which have also come. Cyber sanctions is one such example. In 2017, the European Union developed EU diplomacy cyber diplomacy toolbox, which basically allowed the European Union and its member states to use all measures, including sanctions, to prevent, discourage, deter, and respond to malicious cyber activities against it. So these sanctions basically included asset freeze. It basically included restrictions on the EU nationals to commercially engage with the sanctioned entities and those kind of things. And in 2020, the European Union imposed the first set of sanctions against Russian and Chinese hackers for carrying out the cyber attacks. Now, taking the lead of the European Union, even the United States also developed its own regime, and they also targeted the Russian government for various kinds of malicious cyber activities. Even though these cyber sanctions have proved somewhat effective, one major weakness that they have faced and one major challenge they have faced is that it is not yet clear as to whether this has deterred the perpetrators or the other state actors from carrying out the cyber attacks. In fact, what we have seen is that as soon as the cyber sanctions are imposed, there is a retaliation which is coming from the Russian hackers, from the Chinese hackers, and from the North Korean hackers in response to those sanctions. So they just increase the tempo of their cyber activities against these sanctions. And in this context, it is interesting to look at what is happening in Ukraine conflict. As Purva mentioned, cyber attacks have become a part of the hybrid warfare. What is hybrid warfare? Hybrid warfare has a couple of features. One is the use of proxies. So all of that we looked at, for instance, the use of non-state actors as proxy for by the state actors. That is a characteristic of hybrid warfare. Use of advanced technologies. That is also characteristic of hybrid warfare. That is also evident in the case of the Russia-Ukraine conflict. And the third and most important is basically use of disinformation and propaganda. Right? So in case of Russia, in case of Ukraine, we have seen Russia basically utilizing various elements of the hybrid warfare against the Ukrainian regime. In fact, days before the special military operation was launched by Russia against Ukraine, Ukrainian officials actually faced a barrage of cyber attacks coming in from the Russian hackers against the government ministries and banks, as well as media and other kinds of websites, which basically disrupted their services for a few hours. With this was also the disinformation campaigns, and disinformation campaigns basically spread confusion about what was really happening on the ground. One example is basically there's a new technology called as the deep fake technology. Deep fake basically what does is that it generates new videos which are artificial videos, but they have a fake content. So Russian hackers actually circulated a video of Ukrainian President Zelensky announcing surrender to the Russian forces on the social media, right? So that kind of video was circulated by the Russian hackers in the social media, and that caused chaos and confusion. But that is what a disinformation does, and that is what the deep fake videos does. Imagine today, for instance, and in fact, there is in the United States now. There's a very interesting thing which is happening, that now former President Donald Trump has been indicted for the criminal conspiracy. So one of the cybersecurity researchers 3 weeks ago actually asked AI, artificial intelligence, to recreate images or create images or imagine images of how Trump will be arrested. Okay, and AI generated those pictures, and he put them out on Twitter with a disclaimer saying, this is how AI works. These are not real images. But you know how social media works. Like someone took those images and put them out and saying, that Trump has been arrested, and that caused its own this thing. So that's what the deep fake and AI enabled technology does. And it is in this global context, India has positioned itself as a country which has a leading IT base, information technology base, but also we are utilizing digital public goods or digital public infrastructure such as CoWIN, IndiaStack, Aadhaar, and we want to export it to the world. As Purva mentioned, we have more than 700 million internet users in India. I'm sure many of you would have received an email like this, asking for some details and then promising you some information. Now, many of you are laughing, because you know that this is a fake email, right? But imagine this condition 13 years ago, when you received this kind of email offering some kind of finance and some kind of money, many Indians actually responded to this kind of email. And naturally, there were consequences. As per one report, in 2013, around $12 billion were lost to these kind of fraudsters, or what we used to call as Nigerian phishing emails, with a total loss of around $82 billion so far. Why did it matter to India? Because India was one of the top 5 growing markets for these kind of email frauds. And in 2013, Indians lost almost $900 million to this kind of fraud. Okay. Now, of course, we receive these kind of emails, therefore we know, that these are fake emails. So now even the fraudsters are shifted to the mobile phones. So sometimes you will get a message saying, that you have won a lottery, and can you submit your financial details, and therefore that kind of thing. So that is how, cyber technology and cyber saboteurs are advancing their tactics. But parallel to this social engineering attacks was also the emergence of the threat coming in from our two adversaries, Pakistan and China. From Pakistan, the major threat in the initial days was basically hacking and defacing of the Indian websites. Many of the times these were tit for tat attacks. So a group of hackers, Indian hackers, would go and deface Pakistani website and put pro-India content. Then you'd have a retaliatory attack coming from the Pakistani hackers on the Indian websites, and that is how the thing used to going on. What I used to call as nuisance value attacks. But over a period of time, these attacks have really evolved to become far more penetrating and far more advanced. These attacks are basically now targeting senior Indian government officials, military personnel, to basically extract information. One such case was recently detected by a malware known as Reverse Rat 2.0, and that basically targeted the Indian government officials by sending them a fake link for a Zoom meeting from the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime. Okay, so they said, that this is a meeting being organized by the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime. Please join this link and join this meeting. And if anyone clicked on that link, a malware was installed on that particular person's computer, and then once it breached the system, the malware could remotely click photographs via the webcams or take the information from the USB drives, as well as spread it further, clone it further. So that is how Pakistani threat has evolved in the last few years. But the most dangerous threat comes from China, and it is basically targeting of the critical infrastructure, espionage, and those kind of things. In fact, one of the most prominent cyber attack prior to this current round of cyber attacks coming in from China was APT30. APT basically means advanced persistent threat. Advanced persistent threat basically means that a virus sits in your computer and sits in your computer undetected for a very long period of time, utilizing the system's vulnerabilities. So this particular virus, APT30, was discovered in 2015. When it was discovered, it was found out that the virus was sitting in the system for 10 years. And it was basically taking out information from the Indian computer networks and sending it to China. This computer, and that is how basically prompted then National Security Advisor M.K. Narayanan to say that the computers of the Prime Minister's office are infected. I have a laptop which has been infected by the Chinese hackers. So that really forced him to make that kind of statement. But that statement is just one of the few attributions that India has made officially when it comes to China or Pakistan. So despite facing so many attacks from China and Pakistan, Indian government or Indian government officials have not publicly attributed a cyber attack to Pakistan or China. I can only note two attributions. One was this statement coming in from then NSA, M.K. Narayanan, and the other was during the blackout that we faced in Mumbai when Maharashtra's energy minister spoke about a Chinese malware being inserted into the power grids. So those are the only two attributions that the government officials have made when they talk about the role of China. One of the other recent attacks from China was basically targeting the two vaccine makers, Bharat Biotech and the Serum Institute of India. And it's interesting because they're targeting the vaccine makers, because these vaccines have played a role in our own domestic vaccination program, but also India's vaccine diplomacy known as Vaccine Maitri. Why would the Chinese hackers target the vaccine makers? One theory is that it is basically commercial espionage, because if you look at the Indian vaccine, AstraZeneca or Covishield, marketed as Covishield here, but marketed as AstraZeneca worldwide, that vaccine is being used in more than 120 countries. Okay, it has an effectiveness of 95% plus. Chinese flagship vaccine Sinopharm is basically used in 90 countries, okay, and has a vaccine effectiveness of only 65% plus. So that means that the Chinese hackers are trying to target the Indian vaccine makers, and by targeting also look at whether they can get access to that kind of formula which the Indian vaccine makers are using and take it back to the Chinese companies so that they can improvise their own vaccine. Apart from Pakistan and China, India has also been at the receiving end of other state-sponsored operations. I talked about the North Korean Lazarus group. The Lazarus group has also targeted some of the Indian banks, including the Cosmos Bank, the Pune-based Cosmos Bank in 2018. In this attack, Cosmos Bank lost around 94 crore rupees through the ATMs and online transfers. Again, that money was never recovered. The other attack that the state-sponsored operation that India has faced is from the United States through their PRISM surveillance program. Even though, again, there is some, some amount of ambiguity on that particular attack, on that particular operation, because the US officials as well as Indian officials justified that particular surveillance because of the counterterrorism needs of India. That much of the surveillance which was being carried out by the National Security Agency was against the targets which India had identified. But nonetheless, when the revelations came from Edward Snowden, it basically said, that India was the 5th most surveilled upon country by the United States PRISM surveillance program. Another significant aspect of the India's cyber threat landscape is basically cyber terrorism. So we have anti-India terrorist groups which are based in Pakistan, such as Jaish-e-Mohammed and Lashkar-e-Taiba. They have used social media platforms for radicalization, propaganda, and recruitment. In fact, besides these Pakistan-based groups, we also have the pan-Islamic groups, the global pan-Islamic groups such as the Daesh or the Islamic State and Al-Qaeda, which have also utilized cyberspace for targeting the terror suspects here. In fact, between 2014 and 17, the Daesh's propaganda influenced some of the Indian elements of Indian population so much that some of the Indian youth actually traveled to Iraq and Syria to fight with the Islamic State there. And therefore, countering that particular propaganda has also emerged as a challenge for the Indian security establishment. A related challenge of this, which I talked about, was the disinformation. In fact, fake news and disinformation campaigns coming in from China and Pakistan have really emerged as a major challenge. For example, after August 2019, when India basically created the two new union territories, Jammu and Kashmir and Ladakh, there was a barrage of social media propaganda coming in from the Pakistani trolls targeting India. It talked about, for instance, there's a fake profile being created of a CRPF official who talked about how there was a mass rebellion within CRPF ranks in protest against the Indian government's decision. There were videos being put out about how there were protest demonstrations in Srinagar and other parts of Kashmir targeting the Indian security forces. And also efforts to spread fake news about the various developments in Kashmir. So that is how Pakistan's disinformation machinery has really worked against India. Now, talking about the critical infrastructure, and I talk about the Stuxnet virus. I said that before targeting the Iranian nuclear program, the virus traveled through many countries. The virus also traveled through India. And India was the 3rd largest victim of the Stuxnet virus. We had infections of ONGC facility here as well as some of the oil pipelines in Haryana. These were minor infections, but the fact that this virus spread through the network so fast, and that was really a concern for the Indian policymakers, because that in a sense showed the vulnerability of the Indian critical infrastructure for these kind of attacks targeting the critical infrastructure. And therefore, as a result, in 2014, Indian government set up a National Critical Information Infrastructure Protection Center, and that has now really become the backbone for India's critical infrastructure. Talking about the digital payment systems, you and me, we use UPI every day. We use our debit cards, ATM cards for digital payment systems, but even as some of us are becoming victims of these micro-level cyber crimes, there is also a larger thing which is being played out, where again, as I said, groups like Lazarus groups are targeting the payment systems. In 2016, we had an attack, a malware attack on the Hitachi payment services in India. And that time, that particular attack cost India 1.3 crore of economic loss. And it also forced 19 major Indian banks, both in the public as well as the private sector, to replace their ATM and debit cards. Such was the extent of that particular malware attack. And till date, we don't know whether it was a state-sponsored attack or whether it was any cyber criminal gang which was targeting the Hitachi payment services. Another serious attack was on the Union Bank of India in 2016, when a malware breached the bank's servers and gained access to its foreign account for foreign currency payment systems. And therefore, it allowed the hackers to take almost $170 million from the Union Bank and transfer it abroad. Fortunately, with timely intervention and with cooperation with SWIFT, SWIFT basically regulates the interbanking payment transactions, we were able to recover all that money. But as I've said, that in some cases the money is lost forever. I mentioned about the Cosmos Bank losing 94 crores in that particular attack by the Lazarus group. This is interesting. Okay, so much of what I talked about is basically the surface internet, right? The internet that you and me access every day. But that is just a 25% of the internet. 75% of the internet is basically your deep web. This deep web, which basically is you and me cannot access most of the times. This deep web also has content which cannot be found on the Google's searches or any other kind of search engines. And a tiny part of it is a dark web, which is basically criminal elements using that internet for perpetuating their criminal activities. This dark web or dark net is accessible through a technology called as the onion router. That's why the onion there. This onion router technology, basically, if you look at the onion, it has different layers. So as you peel the layers, you will go to the core of it. So similar kind of the Tor technology, which basically does is that it hides your internet traffic. It hides your location. So typically speaking, your phone, your iPad, your laptop, has an IP address, Internet Protocol address. So in any cyber criminal investigation, once the police get access to that IP address, they are able to do many things. But the Tor technology hides your IP address. That's it. So therefore, it makes you anonymous in the cyberspace. And after that, you can do anything. And that is how the technology is being misused. Of course, there's also the positive use of the technology. So there are many whistleblowers, there are many human rights activists which have used the technology to basically spread out a word about all the kinds of criminal activities and injustices which are happening in their particular country and report it to the outside world, because they are able to do that because their location is hidden. But the negative use of is by the criminal elements, because again their network, their location is hidden, and therefore they can engage in all kinds of criminal activities. For India, I have identified three threats from these darknet marketplaces, or what I call as digital black markets. First is the flourishing online drug trade. Almost 90% of the material which is being sold on the darknet marketplaces is basically your drugs and narcotic substances. So these are some of the snapshots of the two websites, which are basically, you can see, they're actually selling some of the Indian goods on this particular thing. Interesting thing is that it is being sold not just to the users abroad, but also to the users in India. Okay? And if you now link it to the physical world, if you look at India's location today, India actually sits in the middle of the two drug trading hubs. You have Golden Crescent, which is basically Pakistan, Afghanistan, Iran on India's west. And then you have a Golden Triangle, which is your Cambodia, Laos, and Vietnam, right? These are the two drug producing hubs that India is located in. And this kind of online drug sale basically perpetuates that offline drug smuggling. So that's the first major threat. The second major threat is basically the abatement to cyber crimes. So if you go to these darknet marketplaces, and if you search, for instance, Aadhaar, if you search, for instance, passport, if you, for instance, search for PAN card, you will get data sets, okay, with all sorts of personal information being sold for tiniest amounts of money. There is a report which says that all your health-related information, which is now I'm linking back to the AIMS malware attack, all the health-related information is being sold for $250 per record, okay, as against this information such as passport, PAN card, which is being sold by $40, okay. That's why the attack on the AIMS, okay, AIMS being used by all the top political leaders, by the top civil servant officials, okay. Anyone who gets access to that kind of data is a rich person, because then anyone who gets access to the data can actually develop patterns, can know many things. One example which I can cite is that, for instance, if they can access the patient's records of all the top politicians, they would know that anyone who is being projected as a future leader actually has so many health vulnerabilities that he or she cannot live beyond 15 years. And therefore, the political parties are not even considering him as a future leader, right? So those kind of things, they are doing by accessing this kind of data. And the third one is the catalyst for terrorist activities. As I said, that these darknet marketplaces have 90% of the things which are narcotic substances, but in Europe and in some parts of North America, even small arms and firearms and guns and rifles are being sold through the online space. And there are reports which suggest that some of the attacks which have been carried out by the Islamic State lone wolves, the individual terrorists, they have actually accessed the weapons by buying them on the darknet platforms. In case of India, what we have seen is that there are specific instructions which are being passed because it hides your internet protocol location, address, as well as it makes you anonymous, and therefore Tor actually enables you to escape the security forces surveillance. So there are instructions being passed out by these groups such as the Ansar Ghazwatul Hind. Ansar Ghazwatul Hind is basically a franchisee of the Al-Qaeda operating in Kashmir. They are specifically passing on instructions to their terrorists in Kashmir to say, please make use of the VPN, please make use of the Tor so that you can escape the security surveillance. Always use the encrypted apps. So that is how, the terrorist threat gets amplified, because terrorists get access to these advanced technologies and therefore they are able to carry out their activities much more freely. So you would now ask, so what is India doing? Well, in the last few years, India has really made cybersecurity as a policy priority. In fact, we were one of the first countries to really enact an Information Technology Act way back in 2008, and which was then 2002, and which was then amended in 2008. In 2013, we brought out a national cybersecurity policy, which basically tried to bring all the stakeholders on one page. And we have also created in 2015, the government appointed a national cybersecurity coordinator who would, in a sense, work with all the security agencies, technical agencies, as well as the law enforcement agencies to work on the national cybersecurity issues. And as I said, that the government also set up the NCIIPC for the critical infrastructure protection. But besides that, various ministries have also established their own dedicated cybersecurity units. So for instance, the Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology has what is called as CERT-IN, which is basically Computer Emergency Response Team. If you go to Computer Emergency Response Team's website, you would see multiple advisories being circulated by that particular department of what kind of viruses which are being in use, what kind of malware which are being detected in other countries' computer networks, and therefore the Indian users should be aware of those kind of viruses. National Informatics Center also tries to firewall the entire internet traffic for India. We have CDAC, which is also working on some of the encrypted apps as well as hardware, and UIDAI, which basically does protects all the Aadhaar related data. So they have one data center in Gurgaon and one data center at an undisclosed location, so that there is a mirroring of data. So for instance, for any reason the data center in Gurgaon gets attacked and it gets shut down, we still have access to all the Aadhaar data. Minister of Finance, REBIT. So Reserve Bank of India has also set up its own cybersecurity entity called as REBIT, which basically looks at the cybersecurity of all the digital payment systems. So again, REBIT from time to time has been doing an audit for all the scheduled banks, for all the commercial banks, as well as what we call as the prepaid payment instrument, or your mobile wallets, your Paytm, and those kind of things, Ola Cash and those kind of things, so that they can also use some of the cyber security standards which have been laid out by the Reserve Bank of India. Ministry of Home Affairs has set up now Indian Cyber Crime Coordination Center, which basically again looks at all the cyber criminal issues and also works with the police stations to solve many cyber criminal investigation cases. And in 2019, India set up a defense cyber agency. So as I said, that many militaries around the world have now set up dedicated units for cyber operations. So even the Ministry of Defense has now set up its own agency called as Defense Cyber Agency, which basically brings out all the three services, Indian Army, Indian Air Force and Indian Navy under one head, and they can carry out the cyber operations together as well as protect the military computer networks. But even as we do this, there are many challenges which are there. And one challenge which is not just unique to the cyberspace, in fact, it's bane of any security establishment, not just in India but all over the world, is the turf battles between the security agencies. There is still no clarity as to who really guards the cyberspace. So for instance, sometimes the Ministry of Home Affairs thinks that, that it is guarding the cyberspace. Sometimes the Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology says they are the ones who are defending the cyberspace. Sometimes it is the Indian military, and there is still no clarity as to who should be the primary defender of the Indian cyberspace. But that is because these agencies themselves have not been able to resolve their differences. Second is insufficient cyber hygiene, as what Purva was mentioning in her introduction. Uh, we have 700 plus million internet users, and as I said, they're not digital natives. They're the first generation internet users. They lack knowledge about do's and don'ts. Okay, and this lack of awareness manifest in multiple things. As I said, sometimes they end up becoming the victims of the cybercrime because they respond to these phishing emails. But sometimes it also, in a sense, works out in the disinformation space. So anything which you receive on WhatsApp, you will forward it, and therefore contribute to the fake news and disinformation, because the users themselves are not really aware about what is a genuine content, what is a real news, what is genuine news, and what is the fake news. And it also manifests in some other spaces, which is basically all the cyber trolling, all the cyber doxing and cyber bullying that you see in the cyberspace, right? That is also where the manifestation comes in. I was part of one of the projects recently where I presented a where I worked with a member of parliament to create a digital civics bill, which basically combined the elements of cyber hygiene, which basically means what you should be aware of when it comes to the cyberspace, but also be a responsible cyber citizen. So that it basically means that you do not engage in cyber trolling, you do not bully anyone on the cyberspace, you do not post anyone's personal information in the cyberspace, what we call as doxing. So you do not, for instance, post anyone's personal phone number, email address, and those kind of things. So I was working with a member of parliament to create this digital civics bill. So that's the second challenge in the insufficient cyber hygiene. And third actually goes back to the dilemma of international politics. Do morals really matter in international politics? What it means to be a moral country. And as I said, that since many countries are using malicious cyber activities to fulfill their geopolitical rivalries, India also faces the same choice. That if today you have an attack coming in from the Chinese hackers, do you go and retaliate and then carry out a similar kind of attack on the Chinese hackers? Okay, there is a certain moral dilemma associated with that. If there is an attack, let's say, on our own healthcare systems coming in from the Chinese hackers, do we go back and attack a Chinese hospital, right, in the cyberspace? Those are the kind of moral dilemmas which are there. To a certain extent, we have seen recently that India has really amped up its cyber offensive operations, which is why we have now reports coming in from the Chinese Global Times, which have accused India of carrying out the cyber attacks targeting the Chinese education institutions and other kinds of computer networks. So in a sense, that this dilemma remains. Should we commit? It's the same kind of dilemma in the physical space. Should you respond to violence through a violent mean? Right? So similar kind of things. So should we respond to a cyber attack with a similar kind of a devastating cyber attack? And that remains a moral challenge, and that remains one of the primary challenges when it comes to responding to some of the cyber incidents. Finally, India's cyber diplomacy. So as I said, India has emerged as an information technology power, and India is doing a lot when it comes to cybersecurity, and therefore it is very keen to project that kind of experience at the global level. And it is in three ways that it is doing this. One is the creation of cyber norms. As I said, there are certain norms when it comes to your physical battle space. For instance, there is the Geneva Convention, right? In the cyberspace, there is no accepted agreement amongst the states on what is cybersecurity. Should we be engaging on cybersecurity cooperation? So therefore, India, what India is doing is that it is proposing various kinds of cyber norms for responsible state behavior. One of the norms that it is proposing is that states undertake not to attack each other's critical infrastructure. Okay, that's one. Second, that states will undertake not to carry out an attack which will have a physical consequence or a civilian casualty. Right? Those kind of things India is proposing. But of course, when India does that, as I said, even though India has emerged as an IT power, it sits in the middle in many things. It's part of the global south because it is a developing economy, but when it comes to the IT power, it is actually does better than the developed world, and therefore it sits in the middle of the global north and the global south. It also sits in the middle, interestingly, in the cyberspace today, because today's cyberspace is actually divided into two blocks. We have a Western bloc, which is led by the United States and the European countries, and they talk about a rules-based order in the cyberspace. And there is an Eastern camp led by China and Russia, which, in a sense, have their own vision of the cyberspace. India is part of neither of those camps. India sits in the middle of that particular thing. So when it talks about many of these issues, there's a push and pull of these things. So one pull is of economic development, in a sense, that India realizes the benefits which arise from the cyber technology when it comes to the economic development, but there's also pressure of national security. Interesting thing is, if you look at, for instance, there is a talk about the free flow of data. The data should freely flow across the countries. For a very long time, India actually opposed that principle. Why? Because when it came to cyber crimes, Indian security agencies faced a problem in terms of gathering the evidence. Because most of the time, the data was actually residing on a foreign server. And Indian security agencies were not getting timely access to that particular data. And therefore, when it came to free flow of data, India said no. Any data which concerns Indian citizens should be residing on the Indian territory. What we in the cyberspace call as data localization. The data should be stored locally. And that is how the pull of economic development and the pressure of national security is there. The second is managing the internet governance. Now, the internet that you and me see every day, that there is a body which actually manages that. It is called as ICANN. It manages your websites and those kind of things. So for a very long time, India had opposed multinationalization of that particular body because that body was controlled by the United States. And when United States gave up the control, it wanted to open it to entire civil society. India actually opposed that for a very long time. But then ultimately, it came around the model of multi-stakeholder, which was advocated by the United States. But again, that also became a reflection of India's own domestic experience, because if you look at today's technical policy, on cybersecurity policy that India formulates, we have a very thriving domestic ecosystem. We have human rights organizations, we have various NGOs, we have various organizations representing the legal community, and we have the think tanks such as ORF, which are contributing to the policy making. So India actually took that model and said, that okay, we support the multi-stakeholder model even at the international level. And finally, the emphasis on capacity building. India realizes, that it has the capacity, somewhat limited capacity, to fight the cyber crime and face off the cyber threats, but many countries don't have that kind of capacity. So what can we do? So the best is actually focus on cooperation with these countries and give them that know-how, give them that knowledge, give them the technical awareness of those kind of things. So it on a regular basis cooperates with the national computer emergency response teams, with the local law enforcement agencies of the other countries, and it also gives a training in cybersecurity. In fact, our flagship economic aid program, foreign aid program called as ITEC, Indian Technology and Economic Cooperation Program. Now under that ITEC program, we are actually imparting knowledge on cybersecurity and emerging technologies to the foreign countries' government officials. So we have foreign government officials coming and sitting in IIT Kharagpur, IIT Bombay, IIT Delhi, who are taking courses on cybersecurity and emerging technologies and taking that understanding back to their home countries, so that they can also have those capacities to fight those cyber threats. Finally, this is a shameless plug, sorry, but as Purva said, this is my book, Securing India in the Cyber Era. It was published last year, and many of the things that I actually discuss are in this particular book. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Patil. That was a very enlightening talk, and we could see the reaction in the audience as everyone was gasping at the information that you just shared with us. So thank you very much for that. I would like to invite Dr. Parde now to give his presidential address. And before we do that, we'd like to felicitate the both of you. We had a slight, we forgot to do it earlier, so we'd like to repair that mistake. So I'd like to invite Mr. Sahani of Nehru Center and Mr. Agarwal, who have been so generous with their hospitality, and they have supported us through and through in the last 6 months while we've hosted the Mumbai Dialogue. So thank you very much. Sir, if you could please come forward. And I would also like to acknowledge our good friend, the Consul General of Poland, Mr. Damian. Thank you so much for being here yet again. Thank you.
Yeah, that is my pleasure. Hello.
Yes. We made a mistake.
अरे वाह.
Dr. Pandit, now the presidential address.
A very good evening to all. First of all, let me admit it's a very humbling experience to be here among such an august audience. And first of all, I would like to thank the entire Yashwantrao Chavan Center and the entire team that is working consistently to contribute something to international relations from Mumbai perspective. And special thanks to Purvaji and Dr. Mridul Nilay sir for giving me this opportunity. So thank you very much for that. We had an excellent presentation by Dr. Samir Patil sir, and who has already laid the basic foundation of what do we mean by cyber security and what are the challenges that India faces when it comes to cyber security. And I think he tried to cover almost every aspect of cyber security when it comes to challenges to India's security. And I don't think or hardly there is any stone that he left unturned when it comes to cyber security. And that partly makes my job easy and partly that makes my job difficult as well. Easy because now I don't need to speak about the things that have been talked about, so I can skip that technical part most probably, and partly difficult because now I need to find a new perspective to talk about cyber security. What I'll try to do is to I'll try to put forth a few of my observations when we try to understand cyber security in contemporary world. Security itself has remained a contested concept, and one of the major reasons why security has remained one of the contested concepts is the very conceptualization of security. How do we conceptualize security? Traditionally, when we used to talk about security, it used to be very state-centric concept. And whenever we used to talk about security in international relations studies, people used to study state as the sole referent. And they used to think about what are the threats to the states. Gradually, more specifically after what is called as the golden age of traditional security studies, after the end of the Cold War, we enter into a completely new world where people have suddenly started talking about expanding the referents. They started looking beyond states, and that gradually started expanding the purview of security as a concept. And now people have started looking at individuals, human security, and that is something where we started talking about what is called as non-traditional security. Cyber security to an extent could be looked at from that particular point of view, and what kind of challenges it poses to national security. But beyond national security, if we try to look at the concept of security, cyber security more specifically, cyber security, although when we talk about cyber security, it opens up a gamut of concerns that are not essentially or that are not intrinsic to digital world, but it goes beyond that. It is much more than that. It has something to do with our day-to-day life, and there are wider implications for individual, national, as well as global security. Second important thing that we need to understand about cyber security, or the very term cyberspace that has gained a much prevalence in contemporary world, is the moment we talk about cyber world, digital world that we are living in, um, a lot many things have happened. Our perceptions have changed, how we approach, how we look at the world, that has changed completely. Our social experiences, for that matter, have become much more digital. We do connect with people, but now we have started connecting people with by Facebook, Instagram. There are a number of social media platforms that we use to connect with people. Our friend lists are huge. Perhaps we don't even know most of the people, those who are in our friend list. We haven't met them in real life. So that kind of digitalization of social experience we have started experiencing in contemporary world. We have been consistently and tirelessly working towards improving technology, more specifically for increasing efficiency and reducing human efforts. But at the same time, simultaneously, as a consequence, we are allowing digital space to intervene. We are allowing digital intervention in our life, and that is somewhere causes certain fundamental concerns when it comes to security. Because at the end of the day, when we try to define the term security itself, it could be in simple words defined as freedom from fear. So anything that can raise concerns could be considered as a threat to security. When we are talking about the digitalization of social experiences that I just talked about, we are using social media platforms, lot many apps that we have started using, and when we use these platforms, we think that most of the things are free. So we are using social media, Facebook, it's free. You just need to register, you just need to create your profile, and you are there. You don't need to pay for it. But we forget that there's no such thing like free in the world. There are a lot of things that are going on behind that are invisible. You are being tracked, you are being traced, you are being simultaneously looked at, what you are doing, what are your preferences, what you are browsing. All these activities of yours are monitored systematically. That data is stored. In today's world, data is something which has started gaining much more importance. So all these things have started happening in background. Most of us, we do use online applications, as Samir Patil sir has also talked about, when it comes to financial transactions, payments, or digital purchases. We have been using apps like PhonePe, Paytm, etc. And that increases our susceptibility, vulnerability when it comes to such kind of cyber threats. One of the most important thing in present context, if we try to understand, it's not just about how our social experiences have started being digitalized. It's not just about the kind of economic activities and how that has increased our susceptibility to such cyber crimes, but to security domain, it gets priority, it gets urgency. At the same time, you are then allowed to use whatever means available to deal with those concerns. So that's something which happens when you are systematically bringing something into the domain of what we call security. Now, when we look at social media, when we talk about fake news, when we talk about fake propaganda, I think these are all systematic ways to promote something, sometimes a specific ideology, sometimes some sort of political agenda that is being put forth. And that is something which should also be taken into consideration when we look at this broader term called cyber security. So it's not just about the cyber attacks. That is definitely one of the most important parts of it. But at the same time, we also need to take into consideration that there are multiple dimensions when we try to understand the term cyber security. In short, today we are surrounded by an invisible world of digital networks which operates in what is called as cyberspace. And cyberspace today has become an unescapable part of our life, and partly because given the fact that we are increasingly becoming more and more dependent on technology. So it's something which is something which is impossible. You can't imagine to be anywhere without your cell phone probably. If you are not connected to internet, you might feel restless. So that kind of dependence is something which is the characteristic of a new digital world that we are living in. Another important thing in terms of when we talk about our dependence on technology, there's something called Internet of Things, IoT, which effectively reduces human intervention when it comes to use digital, lot many digital equipments, for example, maybe television, maybe air condition, how we have started operating these instruments through Wi-Fi, etc. So that has effectively started reducing human intervention, and the moment that happens, you are allowing space to enter, you are providing that gateway to enter anyone into your private space. So that's something which is one of the most important thing that we need to keep in mind. Privacy perhaps has become a myth in today's digital world. There is no such thing like privacy. And in that particular context, if we look at Indian scenario, I think most of the things have been talked about. So basically, if you look at India, and when we try to look at India's concerns when it comes to cyber security, we know that India now has become the 5th largest economy in the world. As has been mentioned earlier also, there are more than 700 million people, those who have access to internet, are using internet. That is roughly around 50% of the total population of India. More than that, interestingly, according to one survey, India is amongst the top 5 countries that are most vulnerable to cyber attacks. Precisely, India is on the 3rd number in that list. Secondly, India is the second largest country having a digital population, those who have access to internet probably. And that effectively helps us, that in fact helps us in understanding how vulnerable India is becoming day by day, primarily because of increasing our dependence on technology, primarily because of India emerging as one of the major actors in the world. So all these factors need to be taken into consideration when we talk about India's cyber security related concerns. As it has been talked about earlier also, that the moment we talk about cyber security concern, most of the concerns are related to the cyber attacks, attacks on critical infrastructure, including health sector or power grids, maybe nuclear installations, even military installations. So all these critical infrastructures are at danger when it comes to cyberspace, when it comes to cyber threat. Besides, when we talk about cyber attack or cyber security, there's another important concern that has been talked a lot, which is called as cyber espionage. And in present times, that has become one of the major concerns when you're dealing with more specifically the countries with whom you don't have good relations. So that poses another critical threat to cyber security of any country. In that particular context, if we try to understand how we need to approach, or where do we locate probably national security in present context, we need to understand the kinds of changes that have started taking place. First and the most important change, I believe, and which is no bad guys entering into your country by ensuring that you give visa to the right people. So there are certain checks, there are certain mechanisms to ensure that you are protecting your borders, you are protecting your people. But when it comes to cyberspace, we don't have that kind of effective mechanism to ensure that no other bad guys are entering into your domain. And that's one of the most important changes that has taken place and that we need to take into consideration when we talk about cyber security related concerns to any country. Second important thing is when we look at cyber security or when we talk about digital world, to an extent, what we can see is cyber security could be seen as an extension of geopolitical contestation to certain extent, as had been talked about by the previous speaker, Samir Patil sir, who talked about the systematic attacks by certain groups from China, from Pakistan, those who are deliberately attacking critical infrastructures in India, for that matter, are very much part of this changing geopolitics. So when we talk about geopolitics, geopolitics is all about space and who occupies, who controls space. That's the dominant factor when we talk about geopolitics. And in contemporary world, it's not the physical geography, which definitely matters a lot in present world. But besides that, this digital space, this cyber space, has gradually started acquiring more and more importance when it comes to the new forms of warfare. Cyber espionage, as I just talked about, could be seen as one of the aspects of how it could pose a major threat to national security of any country. Third important thing is when we talk about cyber security and when we are talking about how we need to approach the cyber security, one important thing that we need to keep in mind is it's not the traditional security concerns that we are dealing with. We are dealing with security threats, and that compels us to opt for a completely new approach when it comes to deal with cyber security concerns. So you cannot depend or rely entirely on fencing your borders, probably militarizing your borders. That could be one of the approaches, but that won't effectively help you in dealing with cyber related security concerns. What you need to do is to go beyond that. You need to start thinking about different kind of approaches to deal with security concerns. Probably there could be two-level approach you can think about. One is something where we are talking about the precautionary measures, probably sharing knowledge, creating awareness among people, letting people know about the new vocabulary of the digital world, because now there's a completely new world that we are living in. Terms like cookies, probably malwares, or things like that are new terms. People need to be aware of those terminologies. So that could be one stage. Second level, when we talk about the prevention or more specifically deterrence of these kinds of cyber security related concern, we can think about how we develop capabilities, as Samir Patil sir also talked about, probably knowledge sharing, acquiring skills, know-hows. That could be one of the effective ways how we can deal with. Another important thing when we talk about cyber security is we need to take into consideration that it's not just about the state. States are not the only stakeholders when it comes to cyber security, because it's something which requires each and everyone to be part of it. And that is the reason it's not just, there's something called power diffusion which NIE talks about, and which allows us in understanding how power has started shifting from states to non-state actors in contemporary world. So that fact also has to be taken into consideration. It's not the state, individuals, non-state actors also need to shoulder the responsibility while dealing with cyber security related concerns. fourth and another important thing is when we are dealing with cyber security, as I mentioned, that cyber security is a transnational concern. It doesn't recognize, it doesn't respect the political borders. So it goes beyond borders. So you can't say that one single state can alone deal with cyber security. You need collective actions, collective efforts. And in that particular context, what could be done is that there should be initiatives towards the development of international norms. Probably there could be something called cyber security regime, and we need to work on that, because one single country cannot handle, one single country, because there are multiple aspects to it. Samir Patil sir also talked about morality and ethics aspect. That could also be taken into consideration when we talk about norm building, when we talk about creating regimes while dealing with cyber security related issues. So basically, when we talk about cyber security, one thing that we need to recognize is that it's a completely new world that we are living in, but to what extent we are equipped, to what extent we are prepared to deal with all such kinds of threats that are being faced not only by an individual but even by states, and not only by states, developing states, but even developed countries. So we need collaborative approach to deal with these kinds of threats, and that I think probably could be one of the most effective ways to deal with cyber security related concerns. So I'll stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your presidential remarks, Dr. Bharte. We will now open for questions, and our volunteer upon will help me with the mic. So kindly raise your hands if you have a question and we'll come to you.
नमस्कार. सर्वप्रथम यशवंतराव चव्हाण सेंटरच्या या लेक्चर सिरीज अरेंज करणाऱ्या सर्व टीमचे मी आभार मानतो सर्व ऑडियन्सतर्फे. समीर सर, दोनच प्रश्न आहेत. भारतीय सायबर सुरक्षा यंत्रणेपेक्षा सायबर दरोडेखोर हे नेहमी एक पाऊल पुढे का असतात? त्यालाच संलग्न भारत सरकारची यंत्रणा प्रामाणिक देशभक्त सायबर एक्सपर्ट्सला सक्षम डिफेन्स सिस्टीम क्रिएशनसाठी त्यांचे योग्य मानधन देत नाही का? आणि दुसरा प्रश्न, जगभरातून पाकिस्तानी हॅकर्सला सायबर दरोड्यांसाठी खूप मोठी मागणी आहे, आणि ती का आहे? युनो किंवा सुपर पॉवर विरोधावली मिरवणाऱ्या देशांना पाकिस्तानी सायबर दरोडेखोरांच्या मुसक्या आवळण्यात नेमक्या काय अडचणी येतात? धन्यवाद.
And then they'll be answered together.
Hello, sir. I just came to know about the new term deepfake. So my question is regarding electoral politics. How vulnerable are our EVMs in the context of cyber securities?
पेगासिस बद्दल थोडंसं सांगा. स्पायवेअर, पेगासिस.
Upon here in the corner, please, in the white.
There are the multiple agencies which are working to control these particular threats. Is there any coordination between all those agencies in India? And second thing is, I think right now we know that the multiple institutions, especially in India, are privatizing, and this is high time to take an initiative by the corporate houses to build the strong cyber security network for the state. That is also the requirement, because on one side there are the multiple attacks not only happening on the government institutions but also on the private institutions also. So I think that this is the high time to corporate houses has to take seriously to build some type of the institutions for the not only the protection of the state activities from the cyber threat but also the other activities which are related to the state.
precautions to be taken. It's okay.
So when you spoke about the moral compass, about especially with respect to cybersecurity, cyber threat, so in this aspect, the attacking and the defensive strategy becomes absolutely important. Now, on a global level, and especially on a jurisprudence sort of a level, how would attacking a malware or a cybersecurity threat, which poses a formidable threat, especially to a country's security, can be viewed or justified? Thank you.
So is there a cyber insurance in place?
Okay, thank you, sir. Thank you. It was a brilliant lecture, Samir. I have two short questions. One is about, after the US elections, they alleged that the Russians have rigged the elections. So how far is it possible to rig an election from some other country? One. And two, it's about Julian Assange. Okay, when he came up with with all those particular data out of the US Pentagon, okay, and he's been treated as a criminal. I mean, whereas this entire data was a personal data that people were looking at. And the current situation in China is really, really bad. I mean, every person has been profiled. Okay, so how do you look at this entire situation? I mean, if you connect all the three dots, the situation is very, very, very serious, and you may don't know, but then somebody is always watching you. I mean, that kind of a situation you are in. Thank you.
Thank you for those questions. So on the first question about why म्हणजे आपले सरकार किंवा जे सिक्युरिटी एजन्सीज आहेत त्या हॅकर्सच्या मागे एक पाऊल मागे का असतात. आय थिंक इट इज नॉट जस्ट म्हणजे आपण फक्त सायबर स्पेस नाही, ओव्हरऑल इफ यू सी इट इज ऑलवेज द केस की जे क्रिमिनल एलिमेंट्स असतात दे आर एबल टू हार्नेस अँड लेवरेज many things together which the security agencies cannot. Okay, and that is I think the foremost challenge when it comes to countering any criminal conspiracy. Okay, technology मध्ये ते अजूनच जास्त होतं because some of the security agencies, some of the government officials are still grappling with की what is this technology, ही technology कशी evolve होते, and by the time they understand, criminal elements have already done that. Okay, but they are able to do that, the criminal elements are able to do that because they don't have the same kind of restrictions as what the government and the security agencies have. So that is the challenge when it comes to, it is always as I say, cat and mouse game, right? Because the mouse is already always running and the cat is already always trying to catch. Now when it comes to the ethical hackers, I think and why the Indian government is not able to pay. Again, it's a question of resources. Okay, as you would see, for instance, when you look at the defense budget, even though India's budget almost $75 billion ahe, it is still, many people say that it is still less. Okay, so it's always a question of prioritization of resources, and the government has tried to do it. But the thing is, ethical hackers, when they have much more better monetary opportunities, financial opportunities in the private sector than in the public sector. And I have seen, particularly, एक अपनी agency है, National Technical Research Organization (NTRO), when it gave a call for the ethical hackers to join, many ethical hackers did not join because even though money was somewhat compared to what the private sector was offering, they didn't want to get bound by all those security clauses. Okay, because as ethical hackers, you get many opportunities to hack into other computers, other countries, and other companies' networks. You can also do many side gigs, right? But that is something which the security agencies will not allow you. And therefore, जब ethical hackers हे considerations करतात, they don't want to do it because they don't want to get bound by these rules, which is one of the reasons why we are not able to, attract many ethical hackers. Pakistani hackers, yes. In fact, not just Pakistani, Indian, Bangladeshi, and some of the Eastern European hackers, they are and Iranian hackers. They are considered some of the best in the industry, which is why there is a demand. But you cannot really compare them to the terrorists simply because, as I said, there is a problem of attribution. How do you attribute that this particular malware or this particular virus was planted by XYZ hacker? Okay, now. if you look at the experience of the American security agencies or the European security agencies, they have been able to do that. They have actually identified some Chinese hackers, some North Korean hackers, some Russian hackers by their names. But these are the hackers who are the government officials. Okay, they are not the private hackers. Okay, and therefore it has become somewhat easier for them because for instance, if the U.S. National Security Agency is able to locate a headquarter of a Russian hacking center, then they will be able to profile who is going out, who is going in, and who is working there. And that is how they are able to deduct, to say, okay, XYZ, हे लोक जे आहेत, ते याच्यामध्ये involved आहेत. That is not the case with the private hackers. Private hackers can be sitting, for instance, he or she can be sitting here in India and actually working for the US government or for the Russian government or for any other Eastern European country. त्याच्यामुळे ती एक major difference आहे. Pegasus spyware, I think it's a very legitimate concern. I think not just India and many security agencies have used that particular software for the spyware, but I look at spyware or the Pegasus and those kind of things as just an extension of the surveillance which the security agencies are always carrying out, right? If when there was a physical surveillance, now that has become easier because of the Pegasus software. Now, of course, we can debate about how moral it is to hack into any person's computer network, or how legitimate is the target, how legitimate it is, for instance, to surveil a politician of an opposition party or a human rights activist or XYZ. But I think, besides that moral discussion, I would say, that spyware has become the preferred element, preferred tool for the security agencies because it offers them the convenience of engaging that kind of surveillance. Cybersecurity of the EVMs. I link that to the question which Nilesh sir asked. I think at least in the Indian case, we have not seen any instance of the cyber interference in the EVMs, unlike the American systems or the systems in UK or the systems in Australia, because our systems, our EVMs are not connected online. Whereas in many countries, those are actually connected to online networks. Even though they are closed networks, closed loop networks, nonetheless, if anyone is able to gain access to that, they can tamper with that kind of data. But that is not the case here. And now with the PPAT being given to each of the voter, I think that particular element is also particularly ruled out. Coordination between agencies always remains a problem. As I said, that even though India has appointed a national cybersecurity coordinator, he is still not been able to, make coordination a habit amongst the security agencies. And that goes back to the tough battle which the security agencies have. In fact, the thing that I heard was the first national cybersecurity coordinator, he was a scientist. He was coming from the technical community. So security agencies asked the question, why should we listen to a scientist? Right? So now the government learned a lesson and they appointed a retired military officer as the national cybersecurity coordinator. Now the technical agency is saying, why should we listen to a retired military officer? So that question is going to remain. But that goes back to the basic principle, which is that coordination should be a legally mandated thing, a statutory requirement, rather than something which works on the basis of a personal basis. I know you, and therefore I would be more than happy to work with you, rather than someone else whom I don't know. But rather than that, there should be a rule which actually lays down the rules for the coordination and those kind of things. Corporates playing the role in the cybersecurity, I think they are already playing a much bigger role. In fact, some companies such as TCS and Wipro and HCL are also working with the government to develop the cybersecurity solutions for the government. So they are taking that particular role. Cyber insurance, yes, cyber insurance does exist, but the problem with the cyber insurance is that many companies are actually now relying on cyber insurance because they think that a cyber attack targeting them will be rare, and therefore why to spend so much money in creating a cyber secure system rather than just paying a cyber insurance premium, right? So that becomes a problem when it comes to the cyber insurance. But as now more and more companies are becoming victims of the cyber attack and the cyber fraud, they are now actually doing both the things. They are also investing in the cyber insurance, because cyber insurance companies themselves are first saying, as a first principle, okay, before you take the cyber insurance, tell us what kind of cyber security measures you have taken to protect your computer network. If we certify that this network is secure, then only you are eligible to take this particular cyber insurance. The US elections and the Russian elections, I think, yes, I mean, there was a certain role which was identified. But interesting thing that many people have not paid attention to is that besides the technical interference and the cyber interference which the Russian hackers did in the American election system, there was also the disinformation which was also happening from the Russian sources. And that, in a sense, combined or amplified the effect of the Russian interference in the US elections. And finally, I think, if you look at the global geopolitical thing, Assange, China surveillance and all that, I think, yes, today is a worrying development that many countries, because there is no globally accepted cybersecurity agreement, many countries are now on the offensive when it comes to cyberspace, because this anarchy in the cyberspace actually benefits everyone. No one wants the rules of this game, because they think, if there are rules, they will be actually curtailed in what they can do and what they cannot do. But I think there will be a moment, just like, for instance, what we saw in the case of the nuclear proliferation, that the bombings of the Hiroshima and Nagasaki actually made people realize the destructive value of nuclear weapons. And then we saw a steady shift towards the nuclear non-proliferation and the arms control regime. Cuban Missile Crisis, brought United States and Soviet Union to work out modicums of cooperation. So I think similarly is going to happen here. That I think we are sitting on a tipping point in the cyberspace. That that you will have a cyber attack which will have physical destruction and a collateral damage, and that is going to force the states to go back to the drawing board and negotiations table and to say, okay, this is not going to work. We cannot be always on the offensive, and we need to work out ways for a cybersecurity agreement. Thank you.
Hello, sir. Sir, National Cyber Security Policy, it has come in 2013. Do you think that whatever challenges you have mentioned, is it able to tackle, or do you think it is need to be revised? And second question is, you said that the first generation internet users have a lot of challenges. They lack the data, they lack the knowledge. So what kind of do's and don'ts you would like to suggest for first generation users? And one question to Parde sir, you said that cyber security is a transnational concern. So what global collaborative approach we need to adopt? For example, you mentioned about cyber security regime. So what do you mean really? What do you mean really that cyber security regime? What things you would like to? What is your thinking about that? Thank you.
Thank you, sir. My question is, digital evidence are very easy to erase. So what possible steps forward government can take to overcome this issue? Thank you.
Thank you. So I'll take the first question, the last question, digital evidence. I think India is doing a lot in terms of cyber forensics capabilities. In fact, one of the things that has been underway for the last 10 years is improving the cyber forensics capacity. Because the Ministry of Home Affairs is working with the home ministries, with all the states, to improve the cyber forensics. And one of the things which the new Home Minister has announced is that every state capital will have a major cyber forensic facility. And for that, they're actually taking help of the technical community, the academia also, in setting up that particular cyber forensics capacity. So I think timely retrieval of the evidence is something which is very crucial when it comes to cyber criminal investigations, and that's what the government is doing. Of course, the evidence can be wiped out, but if you are able to gain hands on that particular evidence as soon as the crime happens, I think that is going to solve some of these issues. National Cybersecurity Policy came in 2013, so the government is now trying to recast that policy into a strategy. So a national cybersecurity strategy is in works. Admittedly, it has delayed for the last 2-3 years. So prior to the pandemic, the government was just on the verge of bringing the National Cybersecurity Strategy 2020. Then it became 2022. And now, I think it is going to, what I heard is that now it is with the Cabinet Committee on Security, and it will come out probably this year or just after the personal data protection bill it becomes an act. What kind of cyber hygiene practices? If you look at the internet, you will get a lot of these. But some basics is changing the password. Changing the password every 6 months. Having a strong password, a password which has an uppercase character, a special character, and a number, and a combination of that. Something which goes beyond the 8 characters, is a very strong password. Always surfing the websites which have HTTPS. S stands for secure, rather than a HTTP kind of website. Other is not sharing a OTP. We have this habit about sharing the OTP most of the times, but we should not to share the OTP, neither with your relatives, friends, but also not with certainly not with someone who asks for that kind of information. And when it comes to disinformation, always be your own fact checker. Whenever you receive a suspicious message on WhatsApp, or whenever you see news which sounds so so unreal to be true, go back and do a Google search. If you don't find that particular news item being featured on any of the mainstream news websites, then you can be pretty sure that this is actually part of disinformation rather than, or a fake news rather than a genuine news. Sometimes actually you will be also able to find out that there is one element of real news which has been amplified by adding certain other elements which are actually not what has really happened. So be your own fact checker. And something which I always advise many of the youngsters actually, that be very careful on what you post on social media, okay? Because you think that your audience is your friends, is your acquaintances, but actually your audience is your future employer, okay? Because future employer can go back to your social media profile, can dig your social media profile, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and everything, and can see what has what you have posted, what is your view, right? So be very careful, something which you should not be embarrassed 10 years later. You should be thinking about that now and not post that on the social media. Thank you.
Thank you for that question. When I was suggesting that we need to have some sort of a cyber security regime, what I was intending to suggest is that we don't have a unified or a set mechanism how you deal with cyber security threats. So when it comes to international level, as Samir Patil sir also mentioned in his presentation, that Israel opted for a completely different approach when it tried to deal with it, military approach. EU opted for some sort of sanction approach. So we don't have set standards when it comes to deal with cyber security related concerns. So at international level, when we are talking about setting some sort of regime, creating some sort of cyber security regime, we need to identify certain standards, how we are going to respond, to these kinds of threats. So that standard setting is something which I think is important when we are dealing with it, because it's going to be one of the major concerns in near future. So.
Good evening, everyone. This is Dipti Nakle, CEO, Yashwantrao Chavan Center. We had a wonderful session indeed. I would like to quote Robert Mueller, the former director of Federal Bureau of Investigation. I think he had said there are only 2 types of companies, those that have been hacked and those that will be. And today being a very important day for all the companies, 31st March, the financial year ending. So as while we are discussing this over here, God knows how many billions transaction has already been done over there behind our backs or behind our screens. I don't know. Yeah. So thank you, Dr. Samir Patil. It was like everybody, I think most of them were awestruck when you were telling some facts. And it was like, I at least felt like a child listening to these, stories of the cyber world. So very interesting. And Dr. Sachin Pardeji, thank you for presiding over this session. I would like to thank the presence of Honorable Consul General of Poland, who just left a few minutes back, Damian Irzik, for attending the session. Honorable Dilip Varse Patilji, former Home Minister, Maharashtra, and he's also the Honorable Trustee of Yashwantrao Chavan Center, who is sitting right over here on the 4th line. Thank you for being here for this session. Our senior journalist, Pratap Asbe, and Amrish Mishraji, who are also here today. Journalists from CNBC TV 18, Vinaya Deshpande, Zeenat Shaukat Ali, academic and activist, Sahani sir, who just was your Nehru Center CEO, and also Honorable B.K. Agarwal sir, who had been here. He's also one of the trustees. I really thank all of them for attending this session, and each one of you, I think some of them also are regularly attending our sessions, so thank you everyone for being here. Also those who are watching us on FB Live, please try to make it at the seats over here. We have some empty seats and many more at Nehru Center, so please try to make it at this live sessions next time. So once again, I'd like to thank the team, Purva Varse Patil for steering all this, my Chavan Center Education Vertical team, and Nehru Center team who is handling this from the backstage. We will end this session with the national anthem. Thank you so much.
जनगण मन अधिनायक जय हे भारत भाग्य विधाता पंजाब सिंध गुजरात मराठा द्राविड़ उत्कल बंग विंध्य हिमाचल यमुना गंगा उज्ज्वल जलधि तरंग तव शुभ नामे जागे तव शुभ आशीष मागे गाहे तव जय गाथा जनगण मंगलदायक जय हे भारत भाग्य विधाता जय हे जय हे जय हे जय 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 हे